So basically, we don't have to talk about how hard it is to live in the European Union today. We don't have to discuss the fact that we have the Euro collapse, the collapse of the Eurozone. We don't have to talk about how actually those countries now are really, really unstable and that the only person, the only institution that is trying to put them above, again, are the institutions of the European Union and the European Central Bank. But what we want to talk about today is how actually might we do this, might actually make the situation quite better when you reversed all the efforts the European Union made with those institutions once upon a time, a couple of years ago, and why is it that relevant in the context of those countries, those member states in that moment, having actually a stable economical political situation and facing their economical personal problems on their individual member state problems efficiently because they the one which know which sectors are efficient or not, and not the European Union, which is imposing only a lot of directives. So during my speech, I'd like to firstly claim the problem and then say why do we believe that the austerity measures should be the one which will be reversed. And then afterwards I will talk about that moment of reaching the stability in those member states in the European Union. And Nika will afterwards explain even more what does it mean to have those austerity measures and what did they do in the past beyond us that made the situation even worse in the European Union. So firstly, yes, we're talking about the European Union, we're talking about the member states, and when we say reverse, that means that all of the laws, all of the directives, all of the missions and ideas which were being imposed somewhere in the past should be reversed in that way that no any other effect in the future takes place made by those measures in that moment. That means that the original state of laws would be coming back on the moment which was introduced and implemented in the legislature process of those countries, which was made before the European Union made the directive procedure and took those austerity measures to the place in the member states. So firstly, the problem today is the fact that the European Union, no thank you, the European, okay, tell me.
They're short of money, they don't have money. How do you solve that?
Yeah, okay, I'm going slowly, I've just started. So basically, they don't have money. The idea was for them to face the problems of the economical situations in the way that they have their austerity measures in the moment. Then they became a part of the European Union. The European Union has like this really simple set of way of imposing laws. It's called directives. That means that some certain institutions from the European Union says to the member state, in case of austerity measures, for example, you have to cut your general budget for I don't know, like 40%. That's the aim, that's the goal that the country has to achieve. Maybe they will at some point say in this sector, private sector or public sector. And at that moment they're imposing each and every country same directive, which might not be the most efficient today for them to actually implement it. Why? Because at some countries maybe they have stronger public sector. And if the European Union is saying, yes, you should cut budget in that sector, which is actually quite doing well for them, they're not getting anything good back in reverse. And then afterwards, once they finish imposing and implementing those directives and cutting budget on things that were actually quite productive for them, the collapse of the country starts occurring at that moment because something that was doing well for them in the original status is not happening anymore. And the process which is being made is the actual initiative from the European Union, which is doing that on 20-something different levels, but doing it the same way, which is not beneficial for the country in that moment. And that's how the European Union, European institutions are dealing with the problems of the European Union, especially when it comes to economics. Now, austerity measures when they came were the fact that at some point the percentage that has to be protected was defined. At that moment, somebody else from the European Union said, okay, but I believe that your government should be spending less. And maybe that directive was imposed in a country that had government which was not spending that much money at all. And maybe at some point those directives were the ones who were changing the levels and making some sectors to spend a lot of money, and then the other sector which didn't have money to actually cut the budget and actually have some to collect savings. Thank you. Who had their savings maybe didn't have a lot of money to get those savings in the end, and that led to other incomplete lack of solution of the problems that lead to an unofficial economical situation. And those austerity measures were the one that were the main Sorry. They were the main cause of the whole economical situation happening afterwards. Because if they were lacking that money which might have been saved, if they were lacking those austerity measures which might have been helping them to get money back to them to function easily, those austerity measures were the one who were not helping him properly. And afterwards, everything that happened afterwards, the country going to not having the budget to actually do something, the country not having money to actually give social rights to people, Greek, Italy, each and every country which actually had the riots and people who are saying saying we don't have jobs, we don't have money. Everything was starting from the fact that the countries weren't able to get that money and to have their savings to use them in the future. Okay, now that's why we think that austerity measures should be the one doing that. Afterwards, we cut and reversed everything. We would put on the individual countries on their burden to actually deal with their economical situations on that individual level. Because we do believe that somebody coming from the inside is not somebody living in the country, somebody not working in the government. And we do believe that the governments of those countries should be the one responsible for implementing new laws, which will be new austerity measures, but not the ones coming from the European Union, which didn't make actually no individual solutions for those individual economical problems in those member states. No, thank you. Now, once we do that, we will reach the point which is like the stability of the member states, but before that, Siri.
Some countries, like the UK, implement austerity measures of their own will. Do you support that and why?
Yes, we do support the austerity measures which are being implemented by those states. This is why I will be talking in this argument. We know about UK. Yes, UK is like this quite a separated part of the European Union. The countries that did that on their individual levels, not coming as the directives from the European Union, did something good because at that point they knew how to function with their economical going to collapse. And they reach a certain stability which is putting them above all other member states which are still implementing directives from the European Union. That's why we do believe that once we reverse those directives and leave it for the individual countries to face their economical problems how they know and how they can, because they know what actually caused the problem in the first place, they will start to reach the stability on their market. They will start to reach their stability in their banks. They will know what's going on in the certain closed institutions of those member states happening then, which will initially, at the end of the story, lead to the fact that their economy is quite more stable. They know the laws which are being imposed were imposed for that certain cause, certain moment, certain problem that was occurring in the past. And not having something from the outset saying you should cut this for that percentage and now staying in the middle saying, but that's not what we need in order to have some savings in our budget for the public budget and for our governments. So we do believe that once we do this, and once the member states get their independence in solving the economical problems, how they know and how they can, they will reach for the economical stability of them in the future, and that's quite better than not knowing what to do and how to implement directives, which you don't at the end understand at all. So for all these reasons, we beg you to propose this motion. Thank you.
Just wrote down yay for an argument. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Speaker, on the floor. Now, I want to clarify a few things before I start this debate start my own constructive with a very nice and witty metaphor. Namely, I'm not actually sure if proposition understand what has been going on. Because basically, let me clear up what is actually austerity, why are we implementing it, and what is actually happening. Simply put, there are countries in the European Union, in the Eurozone actually, that's kind of the whole thing, the whole part of it is that they share the same currency with well-functioning countries who cannot actually get funds, loans, to support their government expenditure on markets. Therefore, they ask money from the northern well-functioning countries, and those northern well-functioning countries want to see that money back, obviously, at one point. I mean, maybe they're even actually willing to have some losses, you know, out of because we're all Europeans and we're all in together, but mostly they want to get it back. And so they impose a few conditions. They ask for some behavioral changes, so they are certain that in the future they will actually get their money back, and moreover, that they won't actually have to spend a lot more money 10 or 20 years from now because there have been no structural changes. And there's nothing strange about this. This is what creditors do all the time. If you borrow money to someone, or if you loan money to someone, you expect them to pay back. And if you feel that this person is not in a condition to borrow your money, or if you're not sure that they will pay back, you will impose certain conditions in order to make sure that at least you get a majority of your money, the majority of your money back. And it's very strange to propose suddenly that there should be no conditions whatsoever. I mean, should we not have any interest rate? Should we not have any sort of structural conditions to anybody loaning money? Because it's not nice. I mean, people loan money. There are conditions to it. It's normal, and we don't really think that our proposition has given us any reason why this normal course of affairs should suddenly be returned. I mean, they say that it's an imposition of things, but these countries ask for the money themselves, and they know that there will be conditions to the money. They know this themselves. Their alternative is defaulting. I don't know. I mean, I think they make a rational decision to just ask for money and get the conditions that go with that money. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? So, now that that has been cleared up, we are going to give you basically, I'm going to give you 3 points. I'm going to give you an actor analysis. I'm going to give you, I'm not sure if I can finish them all, but I'll try. I'm going to give you an actor analysis. I'm going to give you the 2 major points that will happen if we actually go with proposition. And I'm actually going to go and explain to you the yay point, namely what will happen if we push through with austerity. So, start off with the actor analysis. We thought of 3 characters before we started this debate. A son, a mother who's working hard and has a stable job, and a bit of a deadbeat father who's very afraid to raise his child. The son is basically Greece or Spain, you know. They spend too much money, they don't want to actually take responsibility for their actions, they just insist on having more money. And now that the parents have actually told the kids, like, okay, well, you can have the money, but you will have to change some things about the way you live. You can't play video games all day anymore. You have to sell some of your video games, maybe even sell your Xbox to raise some of your own money. And that's fine. I mean, it will be tough for now, but in the long run, the kid will come out better. Then there's the father, and he sees his son suffering. The son is just throwing temper tantrums and all, and the father has been unemployed quite a bit, and he actually understands that work is really terrible and it sucks. So he's like, oh, Mom, I can't stand the sight of our son suffering. It's terrible. Let's not do this anymore. Then the mother actually has all the income, right? And she's like, look, you can do that. We can stop pushing our son to behave better. But if we do this, you know, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to leave the son. I'm going to take all my money with you. And you guys can go screw yourselves. This is actually very much the situation that we have today. We have the southern European countries throwing temper tantrums over the behavioral changes that they have to make. We have very scared people who are scared of cultural and economic tensions and social tensions in the countries that are happening. They're thinking, oh God, I mean, what if they go really, really angry? Or what if they actually go into something like fascism or neo-Nazism or something like that, which, you know, are very marginal problems that could arise. And then you have the creditor countries saying, okay, yeah, I mean, you guys can stop austerity, you can stop paying back your money, you can just believe that you can take our money, but we're going to go pull out. And then, you know, they're going to say, if you're going to, let's just take go away from the metaphor for a bit and say, let's say that the ECB actually starts printing money indefinitely without austerity conditions attached to it, then Germany will simply pull out of the money. There's actually a discourse going on right now in countries like the Netherlands, like Germany, that if the countries will actually stop austerity measures, then they will pull out of the euro, which basically means the end of the European Union, and certainly means the end of all the countries involved, like Spain, like Greece, because they will default on their debts, their entire countries will collapse, and they will go into a decade or longer of terrible economic depression, and we don't know what will happen then. Which nicely leads into my next point. What will happen? Okay, 2 things. So the first one is that we have seen that these structural reforms are necessary. You have enormous bouts of clientelism in countries like Greece, Spain, and Italy, you know, where a lot of corruption and graft is going on. Government contracts are awarded not because you're actually the best company, but because your uncle is in the government giving you this contract. And we believe that because this actually hurts the function of their economies. This actually hurts the functioning of their economies. And we believe that because their economies aren't functioning, they can't actually afford the social safety nets that we've come to expect as Europeans. And they're relying on us to actually give them money for the social safety nets. Closing.
But the problem that you're having with this whole analysis, the fact that you're bashing on the methods by which these states have been spending money in the past, that does not mean that spending money as a principle is a bad idea for states.
No, and that's why we actually give them money to spend as Northern European countries. That's fine. I mean, we actually allow them to function and keep spending money on their governmental projects, but we check conditions. Glad you agree. So what we get then is that we believe that those measures, those structural reforms, are very necessary. But if you stop midway, you basically get the worst of both worlds. We acknowledge that there's pain right now, that it's difficult. And we acknowledge that it's very hard to keep on going. But we believe that if you stop midway, you will not get the structural changes that are necessary to prevent this from happening in the future again. And we will actually not get the structural changes that will make sure that 10, 20 years from now, they will not actually default again, and Germany will say this time, well, screw you guys, I'm not going to do this anymore. And that's actually the second part. The European Union is based mostly on this idea of solidarity. You know, no more war, we're all in this together, we want to support you guys. But this means that certain sacrifices have to be made by the countries that are simply not pulling their own weight currently. And in order to preserve the European Union, we believe that certain countries actually have to do what they need to do in order to earn the respect and trust of the northern countries, because the northern countries cannot pull it all by themselves. And we believe that if you actually stop doing this, you will actually get a European Union collapsing, not functioning, and that's something we all don't want whatsoever. So because of all these reasons, we beg you to oppose.
Thank you for the drawings, and I call upon Mika to further this debate and sign up here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, since you all know how much I love debates about economics, let's just get right into it. Talking about so what we heard from the opposition side is, look, you have this prodigal son who's not that prodigal anymore, and now the mother needs to step in and teach him a lesson. Now, the problem the government has is, what if the son wants to be an artist? Granted, the mom won't be really happy about it, but it is a course that the son might decide to have. So what the proposition is going to show to you now is why austerity measures have failed in A, costing money, and B, not being the right call for the economy of the countries that are in problems to get started. B, why we need money circulation, and what the root cause of the problem that we face now is with entering the Eurozone too early. And what are the problems with A, the countries that have money and need to give money, and B, countries that need to take money and then listen to the austerity measures. So starting with the idea that, you know, if I give money, I have the right to tell you what to do with the money. That's not necessarily directly connected with I want to get my money back. The idea the opposition is telling you is that the Germany or Netherlands know what Greece is supposed to do with their money, which is not necessarily true. Germany might know what Germany needs to do with its money to profit, but it doesn't necessarily know what Greece needs to do with their money in order to profit. But even more so, Mr. Speaker, by imposing these austerity measures, they actually cost money themselves. Because in order for Greece to be able to cut spending on social welfare, etc., it needs to invest different money in the bureaucracy of the spending of the money and in buying more social pleas on other levels in order to get by with the austerity measures. So we believe that the part of the money they get is being spent in vain instead of being spent in reinvesting in the economy. Now, furthermore, Mr. Speaker, we see that these austerity measures have failed. The European Central Bank has lost its control of the borrowing currency rates in Italy and Spain, which is now which is now risen to 6%, which is insane, and it's obviously showing that the countries aren't paying money back, even though they do have austerity measures and won't be able to pay them back. Now, what we see as another problem is that we think that the way we entered the European Union and decided to move to a common currency is a part of the issue. Because, Mr. Speaker, the inflation trend we are noticing right now with the euro in Greece, Italy, and Spain is the same inflation trend they had before when they had their own currencies. However, since we entered the market in the first place not ready for the market, the inflation rate stayed, but the euro is now the common currency that is being affected by the fact that these countries function on a different level. Now, let me talk about the circulation of money, about the problem, about the stakeholders, namely the rich countries and the poor countries, and I already talked about why moving to euro was done too fast. Now, first of all, circulation of money. Mr. Speaker, austerity measures assume that if there is less spending somehow, the country will earn more. So what the austerity measures basically say is that if you spend the money in vain, if you spend it on bureaucracy, this is bad, and we want you to cut this out. However, Mr. Speaker, this is just one of economical theories. There is another one showing in countries that have high corruption rates, but high corruption rates that aren't limited to a specific elite group rather than corruption rates throughout the state, that this can actually be beneficial for the state. Why? Because maybe not for Germany, but for Greece, Italy, and Spain, the country is in the biggest problem. Why? Because the money is still there and it's circulating. Now, it might not be as regulated as it should be. It might provide for lax taxation money, but it's still circulating in the country, meaning individuals can invest money, meaning individuals can spend money, meaning the entire economy of the country can be moved forward, and then you can implement different measures later on. So what we're basically saying is that entering Greece right now, with the issues Greece has right now, austerity measures not only punish the state that is already being punished, but by punishing individuals which cannot now trade money under the table or do anything that we wouldn't agree is necessarily the best option, by taking away any options with increasing austerity measures in a country that has, I don't know, 30% of people in public administration, and that's where you're cutting the money from, right? You're actually causing a bigger problem because you're blocking the circulation of money. Go, closing.
When Italy implemented austerity measures under Mario Monti's government, bond yields on Italian government bonds came under 5% for the first time ever.
Yes.
Investors are investing.
The reason for that is because it's based on speculations that they will be able to give the money back. However, this effect hasn't happened. They haven't increased internal production and moved the economy forward enough for them to be able to be sustainable. So although it jumped at the moment, what we see in the long run is that the country is not dealing with the issues it has. Why? Mr. Speaker, economy is not about theories. Economy is about people. Now, you assume that people will do something if you implement some other measures. What the Germans assume is that the Greeks will become proper Germans and deal with their stuff in a proper way once they impose austerity measures. What actually happens is that the Greeks, yes, leader of the opposition, become more radical, become antagonized towards all the ideas of austerity measures because they perceive them as a German tool and something Germany and the Netherlands and other countries implemented and forced upon them. So they become against any form of saving money or any other measures that are being offered for them to get out of the crisis, and we radicalize them towards thinking that all strangers shouldn't be trusted, which then leads to not trusting foreign investors, which then leads to less safety for investors who want to come from the outside and help the economy move forward, etc., etc. On the other hand, what it does to countries like Germany and the Netherlands, it gives them a feeling of righteousness over the country that is obviously not capable of taking care of themselves, right? Which then leads to these countries not only investing and claiming that they know what the best is, but basically buying out parts of the country that used to be independent and now now the only parts that are functional are the parts that do not belong to the Greek people in the first place, but who belong to the people or investors coming from other countries who are then using the profit. So this is another blocking point of circulation, which is in the end bad for absolutely every stakeholder involved. The country that is not getting the circulation and the economical development it should have, and the countries that keep giving on money that doesn't get paid back. So this is, Mr. Speaker, why we believe that we should probably reverse austerity measures in Europe, because they're not really being that functional anyways, and we should probably increase money circulation. Thank you.
I know. I mean, as a sort of... I mean, if you have your own analysis, we have to make it.
Yeah.
All right.
No, I don't look at it anyway. Ready? Good. So, I am going to reiterate what their case was, then I have some points of rebuttal, and then I go into our material, which consists mainly of how austerity should work, what the alternatives are if we give up midway, and secondly, on a more principled level, why we believe that saving your way out of a crisis is a viable way of doing things because of creative destruction. The case was that we do have measures and regulations put in place in return for credit, and we should give these regulations up. They never told us how they are going to get their money now. We do have to assume that they won't get their money on private markets, and we do have to assume that somehow they get money. So there are two ways they didn't specify. Either the countries spend the money, so Germany has to give credit without any conditions, or the other thing is the ECB would print money. What is your favorite? First. So so that we do give credit. Okay, good to know that. Thank you. So, if we have that case, which is now established, thank you, let's talk about a few things of rebuttal. So, we do end austerity because, as they say, the Greeks are way better in making a decision on how to make their economy work. Because the ECB and the IMF and everybody doesn't know shit. So, I do believe that if you go in that system and you're a nice person, nice enough, you will try to make the best things possible and the best decisions possible for that very economy. I have no reason to believe that if you attach conditions, you would attach conditions that are stupid. Why would you do this? Obviously, you would like to attach conditions that are smart. So you do it under your best knowledge and best information. Obviously, you cannot know everything, but I do believe you also have Greek people who consult you on that issue and provide with insight. So I do think it is probably a good way of conditions and not an entirely bad way. Also, looking back at the history, how did the Greek make decisions in the past over their economy? Was it only brilliant decisions, or were these decisions partly stupid? Well, I do believe that we have grounds to believe that the Greek economy is not in the best shape it could be. So we have to assume that the main and leading actors made occasionally bad decisions. So there is no reason to believe, and this is the next point of rebuttal, that the money you now claim would be spent in vain, the scarce money attached with conditions. We have no reason to believe that the money we give them without conditions would not be spent in vain. Why would that money be suddenly put to much better use than the money we thoroughly examined and put conditions on and everything? No reason to believe. I do have reasons to believe that the money we give them then without any conditions would be used under an old system with the old structure without any reforms whatsoever. Because reforms are painful, this is why they complained in the first place. Sit down. Then there was a fourth point, which was the ECB lost control over the interest rates. Well, it never had control over any interest rate. This is not the role of the ECB. It is the markets rewarding the risk they assume they take by borrowing people money. So if the rates go down, people trust the country. If the rates go up, people don't trust the country. So if rates go down and we put austerity measures, we believe that the swarm intelligence of all the people who like to lend money leads to the conclusion, oh, well, it is more probable that the country won't collapse. So we have reason to assume that it is probably a smart step if the rates go down. Nika, it's never the economy in an economy debate, it's always a social debate. So, what is the social issue at hand? We have a social system that is not properly working for some reason. I already hinged on a few issues, and he also did by naming corruption, inefficient distribution of resources, and everything, the perks that were given out to voters so they vote for you, stuff like that. Money you didn't have, you gave it away as a politician to be elected. That is an inherently sit-down bad culture. If we need to change that spoiled child, change the behavior, and they ask us for money because they fucked it up, we do have reason to say, of course we're helping you, we love you, you're our child, but seriously, dude, you need to change. You need to do something with your life. We don't just throw money at you. Yeah, please.
Yeah, here's the thing. It wasn't the Greeks making bad calls. It was the Americans sort of causing the problems, which then forced the Greeks to buy out social peace. So it's not that
I get it. So there was some externalities that led to the fact that people suddenly realized that they actually won't get their money back from Greece because it's fucked up. This is why the rates went up and they couldn't afford new credits. So what basically happened is, because of the economic crisis in the US, people took a look at Greece. And they were frightened what they saw. So this is what we are trying to change. We are not the bad guys here. What we try to do is we want to change their behavior in a good way. And Nika, corruption is not a good way to allocate resources. Corruption leads to inefficient allocation of resources because not the ones who can do the job best get the thing, but the ones who can spend the more money in the first place get the thing. This is bad. In the long run, it's better for an economy to allocate resources according to capabilities rather than perks. So, if we're dealing with these problems and we change the structure, we acknowledge that it is painful at times. Of course it is. There's a high unemployment in Greece, in Italy, and in Spain. And many people are suffering. This is bad. We acknowledge that for a few more years, these people will have to suffer. We know that. But what happens when we stop now, when we just give unlimited credit? We will have an economy that is funded by these unlimited credits, which will not be given back, which means there's no incentive for the structures to change in a really nice way for the future. what will happen is this country will always have to be funded by external credit. Is that a good way and a proud way for a people to exist? Or has more pride? Can you have more pride in a situation where we actually exist and do stuff because you do it yourself? And this is what we're trying to push them to. Yes, it is a push, but it is a necessary push. Do young people suffer? Yes, they do. Luckily, and this is a great luck, people can move, and they move to Germany, for example, from Spain, from Greek, and many, many German companies. We have a lack of young qualified workers. Really embrace these workers who come. The unemployment rate among Greek and Spaniard youth people, even in Germany, is 1%. And nearly everyone has a job who immigrates. Why? Because we know we have this duty and we do fulfill it. And this is why, on principle, it is very, very good to have austerity. Because what we are longing for is a situation where in the long run the people of Greece and of Spain can live in pride, although there is a short-term suffering. And we want in the long run that these structures who are moribund right now get broken up, that companies who are not efficient get bankrupt, that companies collapse who are run by nephews of nephews. We want that to change, yes, and we want them to suffer. What we want is a new and creative elite. And in Spain, they're developing business models like crazy because they have to. And I do one forecast. In 10 years, the most creative entrepreneurs of Europe will come out of Greece, out of Spain, and out of Italy because they had to do something. And as a responsible parent, I will push for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker, for his remarks. And now I call upon the member of the government to open the case for the second table. Clear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to preface this by saying that under no circumstances should we ever have economics debate right after lunch. It's just inhumane. But given that we have to play on this particular instance, let's look at what has happened today. And frankly, from everything that we've heard so far, what I want to bring to the table are two main points of rebuttal. One in terms of how do bond rates actually work, and two in matters of a massive premise as to what the reality was before the economic crisis and how we actually got into this. And afterwards, I'll give you 3 points of substantive. Well, two. Well, four-ish. Depends on how you think about them. I'll be looking at one, austerity measures and who it actually impacts, and I'll be looking into the ramifications of that on one, Euroscepticism and how that prevents structural reform. And three, I'll look into the economy and I'll link it into what they've already named this idea of circulating capital and the economic benefits that yields. And afterwards, I'll be looking into why we actually have a moral duty to stop dictating austerities into these peripheral economies, because we screwed them up and we got them into the situation that they're at. So let's look into a couple of the points of rebuttal that I promised you. They keep on telling you this example that, you know what, austerity is ultimately good because these states don't have money, and austerity has helped these states in the past to, improve their credit ranking, making them viable to raise capital far easier. Thank you for that 5-year-old argument. That doesn't stand anymore. The harsh reality is that while, yes, there was a boost about 5 years ago when we first implemented austerity measures, at the moment and for the last few years, because austerity, we've only seen growth in the terms of those 0.2% as we've seen in all the peripheral economies, if at all. Unfortunately, that is not sustainable to sustain the very interest rates that these are already exposed to, meaning that the credit rankings keep on dropping and dropping and dropping and dropping. We've been bleeding these people to take austerity measures for years now, and what we see as a result, not the credit rankings being improved that they're promising you, but getting shittier and shittier because we're not allowing their economies to develop. And we believe that that needs to be stopped and that needs to reverse. No, thank you. The other thing is, this idea of, so what else do we do? Do we put them up for unlimited credit? Because fundamentally, these people are unsustainable, and the North is being asked to borrow to the South, and then we have the right to ask them for something. But the reality is that this debate has ignored so far what has happened that has led to this, right? Because if you think about it realistically, when the recession hit in 2007, the US had a lot higher of public debt per capita than any of the other European states. Still does, for that matter. However, what is it that we're seeing right now? We're seeing that the US is actually growing in terms of economic rates because it was allowed to borrow cash.
Why is it that the European states weren't borrowing money as opposed to the US when it did infuse capital into its own economies? Well, because what we had in the European Union were norms that we dictated on these peripheral economies along the lines of there are certain rates of public national debt that you cannot pass. As a result, we haven't been giving them money from the north as they put it out, but rather we've been offering them bailouts when it got to the point that we've bled their economies and put them in economic freeze for so long that there was no other situation rather than to let them default. We believe that there is a massive distinction there in that these guys haven't actually been offering them credits, but rather have been offering them ultimate solutions when these countries have been getting into desperate situations by rules that they have imposed themselves. We believe that this is fundamentally what needs to stop in terms of the dynamics of the European Commission and the economics involved behind it. No, thank you. I need to move into my substantive. So, that is an important premise to set for this debate, and I think that's very important to understand. Now, another thing that is important to understand is what austerity actually does, right? And I think we need to break it down a bit, because we need to understand that fundamentally what happens is that we're not really impacting society as a whole as much as we're impacting individuals. And afterwards, we need to look into the impact that that has in terms of cause and effect, right? When we're talking about austerity measures, we're talking about either increased taxes or about reduced public social spending in like welfare, education, healthcare, and the likes, right? Or in pensions and the likes. So what we see from there is that the economic burden that we're imposing on our own citizens gets increased more and more so with every austerity measure that we implement. That fundamentally means two massive issues. Either they lose, salaries or they lose down on pensions. The bottom line is that they lose in terms of dispensable income. The problem there is that that has a two-sided effect in terms of the effects of austerity as a society as a whole. It creates a narrative whereby the North is dictating solutions to us that are hurting you and your own pocket and your own livelihood to the point where it is unfeasible, right? You have people defaulting their own individual credits towards banks because they cannot simply sustain their livelihood that they would in the past because of the austerity measures, and they're losing their own goods. They're seeing the European Union has dictated that upon them, as well as all of the structural reforms that the European Union is asking them to undertake, meaning that there's an automatic point where these people associate the European Union and the structural reforms that would be plausible with the austerity measures that they're hurting because of, meaning that we'll never actually end in a situation where we can implement the structural reforms that are needed because of the Euroscepticism that keeps on growing into these economies. Actually, I'll take you.
You're talking about a world where for some reason we would have unlimited money. What you're proposing is that Germans and Austrians should pay the economic burden.
No, the reason the Germans need to pay is because they screwed these countries up, and I'll talk about that in my substantive. But before that, what you need to understand is because we're damaging their fundamental capital and their disposable income, we're minimizing, and this plugs into what they talked about, but they haven't really emphasized the mechanism of, which is this idea of circulating capital, right? Because having disposable income within an economy means that I am likely to spend more. I'm likely to buy the German Bosch cars, which we did in the past. I'm likely to spend money and actually make sure that I spend money on products and on services. That means that economic agents will be incentivized to provide those products and services, meaning that where there's an increased supply, there's going to be where there's an increased demand, there's going to be a necessity to increase supply, meaning the economic agents will actually start growing again as opposed to stagnating into economic freeze that they're in right now. Why is it that we believe that we have a fundamental duty towards these states to help them get that economic boost and stop dictating that austerity measures are the ones that are necessary? What we see with austerity measures is, they've said it already. The European currency has played a massive role, right? Germany accounted as a whole, Germany's trade surplus accounted for the whole trade deficit of all of the European countries in the periphery, right? The problem there is that while that currency has screwed up these countries, it has massively benefited Germany. So we think it is only normal for Germany to have to bear the blunt of the pain for that, rather than let it ramificate on the lower ends and on the individuals within these peripheral economies. Even the first bailout that the Nordic states have actually offered to the peripheral economies, that money was fundamentally used to pay those countries credits towards their own banks. German banks and French banks were actually the ones that ended up receiving the capital results of the first bailouts, which ended up increasing the public debt of these peripheral economies, but in the end helping the German economies and the German banks. We believe that that kind of way of leeching on these peripheral economies makes a moral imperative for us to support them and stop demanding austerity from them. And this is why today we're proud to propose.
5 speeches in, we believe an important part of this debate has been left out, and this is how actually austerity functions and why is it the only way for European economies, especially peripheral economies, to actually get out of the economic crisis we've been in for the last 5 years. We think it's the only way out, and I'll explain why. Before that, I have 5 points of rebuttal. The first one goes to Stella. Now, she answers my POI in a very unexpected way. Why? Because when I ask whether she should support austerity measures imposed by individual countries like the UK, she says yes. Now, there's a big problem with that. If they support that, then in reality, some countries will support austerity, others won't. Now, the problem is that the most stable economies in Europe are currently imposing austerity measures, like Germany, like the UK. The point with that is, even France, under Monsieur Hollande, he portrays a sort of a left-wing agenda, but actually he's more austere than most right-wing parties in Europe. The problem is that those countries won't tolerate it, so they'll either tear up the Eurozone, where the peripheral economies will be thrown out, or they'll exit the Eurozone on themselves. Both scenarios are catastrophic for the countries they're trying to protect. The second point of rebuttal, only shortly, it's not the Greeks to blame. We just say they lied about their own statistics when they entered the European Union, when they entered the Eurozone. They lied to us, so they are to blame in a large part. But now I'm moving to the second half. 3 points here. Firstly, he says that it is problematic that we impose austerity on these countries. Now here's the problem with that. Firstly, we're codependent on them. If we're part of the same currency, it's a part of our interest. But more importantly, it's in their own good. By imposing austerity, you're decreasing government spending. What does that mean? That means less demand for loans. Why is that beneficial? Because when you have less demand for loans, the interest rates go down. So private capital owners can get loans more easily to start businesses. This is how the economy recovers. The problem is, no thanks, when the government invests money, it actually increases the demand for loans, it increases the interest rate, it actually increases demand, and it crowds out private investment. The second thing, he talks about North versus South and how actually austerity measures mostly benefit the North. We disagree with this as well. We don't think the problem is that some people like to say colloquially that southern countries are just lazy. It's much more structural than that. The point is they have lesser productivity, but not because they're lazy, but rather than that because they have bigger minimum wages. They insist on more benefits, etc. for workers. No thanks. So the point here is by austerity, by decreasing things like the minimum wage, you're actually increasing the productivity per euro, you're increasing their competitiveness per working hour. Why is this important? Because in such a situation, investors are more likely to invest in those companies rather than in those economies rather than economies in the north. So we're increasing the competitiveness of southern economies, and that's the only way for them to work in this situation. No thanks. And the fifth point I want to make is about, they say that circular demand keeps the economy growing. Now here's the problem. It's the idea if I can get more money, I can buy a German car, so the money keeps circulating, the economy recovers. The problem is if I don't have the money to get the German car in the first place, I borrowed the money, then I get a loan to pay for the car. Afterwards, because there's no real growth, I get a loan to pay for that loan. I get a loan to pay for that loan. At some moment, it's bound to burst. The problem with the economy isn't in the bust, it's in the boom. It's in the boom because it's not dependent on the real growth in the economy. Rather than that, it's dependent on us trusting that we can pay back for something. That's how the housing boom functioned in the US, which led to the economic crisis in the first place. People believe they had money they didn't have, but growth can only function up to a certain level when investors or loan givers realize that you actually can't pay that money back. That's where the bubble bursts, and that's where the economy fails. No thanks. So why do we think that the austerity is the only way out? We think that the thing that started the crisis in the first place was too much spending. When countries got into the Eurozone, the fact that they were part of the common currency influence their interest rates. They could borrow money at much lower rates. And this is what led to Greece having a very good credit rating for a long time. This is also why the boom was much bigger when the bubble finally burst. When we finally realized that countries like Greece don't have the resources to pay for the loans they took. So we, in essence, think that because of the euro, the problem was much bigger in the Eurozone rather than in the United States or other countries which were hit by the global recession. But here's the problem. The alternative to austerity measures, to big government saving, is big government spending. The government's trying to bring a fiscal stimulus into the economy. And we believe this is structurally very problematic because it can never lead to a long-term recovery. No thanks. Why? Firstly, you demotivate investors. If a country would to reverse its policies, those investors would be more likely to take their monies to some other place because they generally don't trust the government changing that policy at the moment. But most importantly, even the people who want to invest money, as I already pointed out, can't actually do that because the government can borrow much bigger amounts of money because when a government defaults, you can't actually do anything that big to it. You just don't borrow money to it. If I can pay back my loan, the government will take my house, but no one can take anything away from the very government. So the government can't borrow more. It's simply more useful for them. Yes?
Okay, the average Greek worker puts in somewhere around 6 hours more and gets somewhere around 30% less. How are you going to come to a point when they have enough money to spend to boost their own internal economies?
When their wages come down to a lower level, yes, we are ready to concede that they are competitive to the German worker. At that point, I would be more likely to invest my money in Greece because I can get more per working hour per euro than in Germany. Until then, you don't solve the problem. So in essence, you crowd out private investment. Private investors actually can't invest their own money. This is problematic. Because the only way you can get to recovery is private investment. Because private investors only care about growth and about profit. Governments often care about social peace and things like that. That's why governments aren't rational investors. And finally, we think that the debt gets bigger and bigger if governments try to borrow money. It leads to their GDP, debt to GDP ratio becoming bigger and bigger. And at one moment, private companies, private banks won't want to borrow money to those governments anymore. So that's when the bubble will burst, and it will be even more painful than this time. The only real solution is austerity, is small growth. Yes, we're willing to concede it can be 1 to 2% a year, but it can be stable growth. We won't have things like happened in the Baltic countries. Growth of 15% in 1 year, then a recession of 13%. A contraction of the economy of 13%. We would gladly choose a 1 to 2% growth. It's stable for investors. They're likely to invest more money. It's stable for people. They know what to expect in the long-term future. When you have stable expectations of your economy, it's better for everyone. Vote off.
What second government told you today is that because of how austerity measures work, because of their nature, and because how they were implemented, they practically impeded on any chance of economical growth, and they practically went against the mere possibility of these countries solving the problems and going through a structural change and solving the situations and the problems that they had to deal with in the last years. In my speech, I'm going to have 2 points of summary. First of all, why the austerity measures were so harmful and so detrimental both to the economy and both to the people. So I'm going to analyze all the stakeholders involved in this situation. And secondly, I'm going to have to explain why imposing austerity measures was an immoral thing to do in the first place and why Germany shouldn't have acted as it had done. But before that, I have 6 points of rebuttal, I think. First of all, they said that this is the only way out. I believe that no, this is not the only way out. My colleague explained, I'm going to explain in my summary point, that if there were other countries which were in similar situations and which were dealing through comparable problems that used other methods to get out of the economical crisis, such as the United States of America or such as France, which means that borrowing is not hell on the earth. It is not such a huge problem that you have to borrow. I'm going to explain later on my point. Second point of rebuttal, that other countries have implemented austerity measures such as Germany and UK. Yes, they did, but the degree to which they implemented was minimal. Therefore, the effects of the austerity measures were not as bad, not comparable as bad as it happened in Greece or Spain or other countries where we implemented austerity measures. Thirdly, they said that the Greeks have to pay because they lied in the reports. We said that they already paid, that they no longer have to pay, even if we should let them pay because they decided how they should pay and not because the EU imposes them some austerity measures because it is not the right thing to do. next about the investors' trust. What happened actually in the United States of America after the government made an infusion of capital is that yes, on the short term, the trust of the investor decreased on the short term, but after a few months after that infusion of capital, the investors' trust went higher, and it went back at the same level as it was in the first place. So I believe that only because you have to make an infusion of capital in that economy doesn't matter automatically that the trust of the investors will decrease. No, thank you. On their point about the Nordic state, I believe that point was false, because the level of the spendings of the Nordic states and which are known as the welfare states, it's much higher than they actually sustained. And lastly, they said they say that growth can only function when people have money. Yes, exactly, this is what we want, but the problem is that you impede the circulation of money by the fact that you cut off their salaries, you take off their money, you don't give them money to spend. So basically, what you do is that you impede the circulation of money, which is the very basis of how this should work. Also, we believe that on the point of the investors, we believe that an investor trusts more a country where there are no social tensions, and when they can have an infrastructure where their state makes investments, and not a country that the investor don't trust a country such as Greece that is suffering because of the austerity measures. So I believe that it is better to have a high level of debt such as Japan or such as USA has. No, thank you. Because even though that there is that high level of debt, investors can still opt in and invest. And also, they said that the alternative was the default, really, that there is no need for the default if investments are well made, and even if they should go and default, we believe it is still better for them, because practically these countries should start from zero and could rebuild their economy. It is much worse to have austerity measures than the alternative of all that we are supporting today. Okay, so summary. No, thank you. Why the austerity measures were so harmful? First of all, because they brought no improvement in the economy, because time has passed 5-6 years and the economy didn't get better. The quality of life didn't get better, and the economy did not improve, not only in numbers but also in reality. Okay. Actually, it got worse. No, thank you. First of all, on the individuals, because it was a direct attack on people from public system, a cut in salaries, in personnel, in welfare, social payments, which affected directly the people, the citizens, the poor, the children, which means that it decreases the quality of life of their people, and it increases the level of unemployment. Also, it increased the taxes, and it was less spending on education, health, professional trainings, which actually meant that it impeded internal growth of the countries that were affected by austerity measures. So basically, the main consequence is the fact that the country could not progress economically because it did not have the basis technologically or educationally to progress for those people to go on and progress. Also, their activities were blocked by strikes and restructuring, so including the public institutions were blocked. Okay. The second point about how the economy, we believe that there was no need for these measures. We believe that they were unnecessary policy. And why is that? Because there is a wrong premise that they build their cases on. Because if you have a high level of debt, you are in danger of collapse and you need austerity measures, which is false, because states with high level of debt, such as France, USA, Japan, did well in economic crisis because they actually made investments in the economy. They assumed the risk of growing the level of debt that they had, because they knew that this is not a very wrong thing to do. And even though on short term, as I explained, it decreases the level of trust of investors, on long term, this is the only solutions to do. The real problem was that Greece and Spain made no real investments in economy and in people, because all the lended money were not spent on investments but were paid to pay the debt of the country. So even though the debt level decreased, in reality, because there were no investments, the society could couldn't improve. And the problem it impeded any type of improvement on the economy, which means that it legitimized Euroscepticism and public discourse against EU and Germany, the point that was never answered to. And lastly, why imposing austerity measures were so immoral for European to do. This point was explained by Radu and was never tackled by the second opposition, which means that practically they said that yes, Germany should have never done that.
Thank you for the remarks. Now I'll call upon the whip speaker of the opposition to analyze this.
Oh, economy. So, basically this debate is about whether I will borrow money to pay people to make a whole, and then borrow money to pay other people to make another whole. Or, I will not borrow money at all, someone else maybe will, and he will rather build the entire fabric or something like that, which will long-termly bring us some benefits. That is mostly how we see it. And even though spending might be shortly term look like a good solution, we believe that long-termly it creates a complete chaos where that boom and bust that happens in capitalism will only remain bust and boom will not happen, which I will explain you through questions. First question is why we believe that austerity will lead us to progress, maybe not the biggest one, but the slow one, the stable one, and sustainable one. And secondly, we will explain you who knows better, which we believe that was clash that happened in the first half of the table, whether the individual states should put austerity measures or the European Union should do so. Before that, a couple of points of rebuttal, most of it will be interwoven. When Greek voted for new democracy, their bond yield fell because all investors actually recognized that austerity measures were a rational one and they supported it. So they decided to invest. And the second thing also is that it's not that actually everything failed after we applied austerity measures, which can be seen from Italy's economy getting better after they put it on austerity measures. No, thank you, sit down. And the second thing is that Greek credit ranking also increased after they put austerity measures. So from 1C now it became 3C, where we can see that also austerity measures brought us to some sort of progress. And as my partner already explained, yes, maybe we will not have 15% of progress, but we will have that one, and we believe that that one is better than zero. Now, on to my clashes. So firstly, why we believe that progress is actually going to be possible. Because we believe that entire crisis that actually happened because we started spending way too big amount of money that we actually never had or never earned, which actually make countries be in such a big debt that we can now question whether or not anyone will ever be able to pay those big amounts of money that we see that everyone owns to each other. So the plan that some more developed or less in recession countries, whatever, came up with was the austerity measures. And why we believe that they're better? We believe that they're creating more sustainable economy. Firstly, because we stopped spending such a big amount of money that we actually don't have, which in the first place brought us to the situation in which we are now. Second thing is that because some individuals will be able actually to invest because the high rates will not be as big as they are now, because the state will stop borrowing, and when the state stops borrowing, there will be no reason for those rates to get higher and higher. So individuals who are actually interested into investing and making those investments long-term beneficial, they will actually be able to do so because they will have enough money because the rates will not be so big. Secondly, other investors that would not trust those countries who would reject austerity also wouldn't invest. With having these austerity measures applied, we do believe that investors will be more likely to trust those countries because they will see, yes, we are giving you money and we gave you some conditions, you have decided to respect those conditions, you have decided to respect austerity, so it is much certain for us to invest money in your country than it is if you do not have those things. Thirdly, we believe that, as my partner already explained, that inflation, things that can happen if we do not have have austerity, which will make investors interested into going in other currencies, also will not happen in cases of having austerity. So they probably be interested into keeping in touch with the euros as they are now. Of course, the another benefit that we see is that debt will not become bigger and bigger as it would if we do not have austerity measures. And why? Because the state will not be able to continue borrowing and borrowing and then spending and spending without making any constructive plan. What will they actually do when the debt gets so bigger and the investors do not want to invest more, so we cannot make money and we cannot return it, so we will keep on taking it. Now, and also what we see is that in status quo, without austerity measures, what will actually happen is that we will keep going down and down and down, and people will continue promising that capitalistic boom will happen, but no one will actually know whether or not it will happen. And we believe that it won't, because we will have no one to invest and we will only have states borrowing it. With our plan and with having austerity measures, we are not sure whether that boom will happen. We think that it will. We think that it will take it much more time than it would now, but then hold on, I'm very confused. So, what I wanted to say is that actually, with having austerity, we are having sure progress. Maybe that's 1%, but it's better to have certain 1% than having probable or possible some percents that we believe it's not going to happen. Closing.
But the point was that you're not having that 1%. You have 0.2%, which is not even enough to pay for your own current interest rates.
Yes, but I already said that some states started progressing since austerity measure happens. Maybe it was not as high as it is expected, but it was at least some sort of progress. And what we believe that will happen by your plan is that they will start going down and down day by day with their debt getting bigger and chances of ever paying it getting lower. And now on to actually who knows better. We think that European Union knows better, and we think that European Union should put these measures for two reasons. Firstly, because we believe that those measures will be more rational. Second, more important, because the European Union market will be more connected and it will be more better. So why firstly? We think that Greek loves her 14th wage. They simply love their 750 euros minimum wage, and they simply know that in cases of having austerity, which is happening right now, they will have social conflicts in their society. In order to avoid those social conflicts, they will probably go the easy way out, quit the austerity, that's what would happen by the plan of opening government, and they will keep on borrowing money until they get in the situation which I already explained in my first clash. And that is the reason why we believe that European Union will be more rational. Firstly, because they need that economy to actually work. They're aware of the fact that they are using same currencies, so if one country goes down, that will make a huge problem to the other one. So they do have interest to make their economy altogether much better. Secondly, as we already said, United Kingdom put austerity on themselves, and they're currently working much better than the other countries who are actually fighting against that austerity. So we see that with austerity, someone can actually progress. But second thing, we also believe that market of European Union will be much more connected if one measure is implied on all countries that are participating in the same currencies. Because what will happen? You will have the bigger market, and you will have the people, a bigger amount of people who will also be able to interact into that market, which will probably make that market even better. So basically what you're getting from me is why austerity will bring us to some progress rather than not having austerity, which means having no progress, and on the other hand, why we think that European Union knows better. And for all these reasons, we beg you to oppose this motion. Thank you.